Hi everyone, and welcome to our Getting Started video on Unit 7020, Leadership Coaching and Mentoring Skills. This is just going to be a short 15 to 20-minute video just to take you through the assignment and give you a good base to get started with it. I'm going to hand over to our tutor, James, who will take you through. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. So we're going to aim to try and give you all some guidance and some approaches to this assignment in the next 15 minutes or so. There are lots of questions on this assignment. It's not as bad as it looks on first scan because a lot of the questions are doubled up. So we have one question based on coaching and another question based on mentoring. Straight away, advice though is to try to get your answers separate across both. So please just consider trying to have this as a question answer structure all the way through the assignment. That just ensures that your risk of referral is lower because the markers know exactly where they need to go to see the information they need, and it also ensures that you've got the adequate airtime for mentoring in particular as compared to coaching, because often people squeeze the mentoring out and then get referred. So our advice straight away is try and keep the responses separate for coaching and mentoring, and really try and tease apart the differences between the two practices in this assignment as you go through it. Let's get going then. Learning outcome one to start with is to understand how coaching and mentoring programs support business objectives. This is kind of making the case for mentoring and coaching in an organizational kind of context here. We don't tend to get too many referrals on this first learning outcome overall. A couple of exceptions we'll try and point out. But to start us off, we're going to evaluate the benefits of coaching to an organization and then evaluate the benefits of mentoring to an organization. Pretty straightforward again. Just to reiterate, please, our advice is to keep these two responses separate. So we're going to give mentoring just as much airtime as we do coaching. That's rule number one. The second thing here is just to make sure you perform an evaluation. So this is at the end of your work, you need to have an opinion, have a view of what you think the benefits are based on the different modeling benefits research that you've managed to bring together. So try to make sure you've met the command verb of evaluate here and separate the two out. Otherwise, hopefully from your course and experience, that should be fairly straightforward to address. The benefits, should be fairly manifest. Moving on to 1.3 and 1.4, we're looking at how coaching programs support business objectives and how mentoring programs support business objectives. So as part of your work in these assessment criteria, it will be good practice to define coaching and mentoring. I know this is done, you probably done it on your other assignment, or you will have to do it again. But I think that good definition of coaching and mentoring gives you a foundation to build the entire assignment from. So advice would be to make sure you've got some clarity around those definitions and the distinctions between the practices. When we go into looking at then how the program support business objectives, it's useful to understand maybe some examples of business objectives here that you could try and then draw the linkage between, objectives A, B, and C, and how then coaching programs could support that, or mentoring programs could support those same things as well. We also need to make sure we performed an assessment here, which is to really dig around it in some detail. Ideally, look at some evidence around that if you possibly can, just to make the linkage as clear as we reasonably can in your answer. And indicative content as well helps us here with some ideas of how you might go around that as well. So again, those two are normally kind of okay for most people. Where we do see a slight spike, I think that's right, Charlotte, isn't it? In referrals is these next two, yeah. Now, 1.5 and 1.6 are around the guidelines, the protocols, and a statement of ethics around coaching and mentoring programs around the organization. So a good place to start here is the many different examples of this. There are public sector examples of this that are readily available you can find. We can look at the EMCC as well and their guidelines and protocols and ethical statements. So recommendation is to start with some templates and some existing structures, but it's not enough just to put those in and that's your answer. The key thing here is to develop. So that implies a starting point and then to develop something that's new that you curated towards your particular organization in this case. And so I think that's the main reason why we get referral points in these two questions, because the students haven't developed these guidelines, protocols, and the statement of ethics. So just try to make sure you've managed to do that. With the statement of ethics, just make sure again, although it's just one question here, 1.6, make sure that within your answer you have um, given treatment to mentoring and coaching, because there may be different ethical considerations for both practices. For example, the mentor who gives advice that's incorrect, and then the person who follows the advice and ends up to catastrophic consequences, where the ethics in that, are there any kind of guidelines around that might just manage that relationship and that flow of advice a little bit better? That will be different from a coaching relationship, of course, where advice shouldn't be given in practice. So you might find on reflection there are some different ethical considerations around the mentoring relationship. Nepotism might come into play, etc. You might think around, for example, where the typical mentoring relationship is drawn from in the organization. So it could be a line manager or somebody else, a manager in the organization, versus a coach, which could be maybe external, maybe different ethical considerations. The point is trying to tease the two things apart and deal with each specifically in your answer. And that also goes for your guidelines and protocols in 1.5 as well. On learning outcome 2, then we're going to understand the implementation of coaching and mentoring to achieve organizational objectives. Okay. So again, we're doubling up here. 2.1 and 2.2 is the same question, just asked around coaching and mentoring, but again, please treat them separately if you can. Indicative content here is again pretty straightforward. So things like cost of the training, staff time, maybe external consultants if they're external coaches. There's some fairly straightforward organizational and resource implications for doing both these things. So again, I think those are relatively straightforward. Just again, command verb is discuss. So this implies that you are to ensure that your answer involves contrasting perspectives and opinions on the resource implications here. So that's something to bear in mind. Make sure you perform the discussion around those questions. 2.3 and 2.4 then, we're now going to explain how to overcome organizational and individual resistance to the implementation of coaching and mentoring. And again, please treat these separately. There may be specific resistances to coaching that are different from the resistances to mentoring. I think one of the big things here to ensure, again, in your answer, that you have identified both organizational resistance, so group or large scale resistances, as well as on an individual basis, and treat both of those separately in the answer to make sure that the market can see very clearly you've answered both elements of that organization and individual.
We do get a bit of a spike in referrals for 2.3 and 2.4 as well, just so everybody's aware, just to make sure you treat those both differently.
Yeah. So again, make sure that you treat coaching separately from mentoring, and organization and individual resistances is really important. And you've got to explain how to overcome those resistances. So identifying it is one thing, but what could you do to try and overcome those things is, again, the major part of the question. We're now going to move on to learning outcome 3. Again, I think this is where we have a lower referral rate. This is generally one that...
that's right.
Great. Normally, this is one where people find it a little bit easier then. So here we're going to devise an implementation plan to install coaching programs and mentoring programs. So here, it's an implementation plan, like it says on the question. Hopefully, fairly straightforward. I think just to bear in mind here how objective settings and metrics could be really vital to this implementation plan. So just setting out from the outset what measures of success you would see, what good would look like for these programs, and perhaps how you could establish and engage with key stakeholders throughout as well. Just things that you think would help to implement both these practices better within your organization. With part of that plan as well, just try and, if you can, have timescales, resources needed, key milestones. Just make sure there's something coherent there that looks like it would work. in practice would be really good practice. 4, then we're going to be able to evaluate the impact of the coaching and mentoring plan. So 4.1 and 4.2, again, doubled up here, looking at coaching culture, mentoring culture. My advice here to start would be to define what we mean by coaching culture or a mentoring culture. Often having a nice definition really helps you to gain clarity and more efficiency in your answers as well. So it's worthwhile just defining these terms, I think, here. Once you've got the definition, then you're able to kind of go ahead and try and evaluate the impact you think that culture may have on the organization. So impacts could be positive, maybe negative. It's, we're kind of proponents for coaching and mentoring here, but there could be some maybe dark sides, some bad sides, or some advisories around this. Or there could be some assumptions we might make, or some logic that we need to follow if we're going to evaluate that impact effectively, right? So again, the key command verb here is evaluate. This means you would need to have an opinion, a judgment based on evidence here about what you think the impact is. So your answer has to come to that point of what you think the key impacts would be and establishing a coaching culture and the key impacts of developing or establishing a mentoring culture too. So hopefully that helps with those two to get started. And then we're going to move on to learning outcome 5, which I think is another higher referral rate one, isn't it?
Yes, so this whole learning outcome is quite high for referral rate.
Yeah. Now the good news is I think there is some advice we can give here which should help to head a lot of those referrals off. And that is the whole point here is to understand how to develop skills as a leader in coaching and mentoring. That's your personal skills. It's not very clear in the questions, but this is in effect a multiple stage personal and professional development plan as a senior leader in coaching and mentoring in a practitioner focus. Okay. So it's going to start by 5.1 and 5.2, where we're going to assess the current skills of communications and people development to support that personal practice, your practice of coaching, and then in 5.2 of mentoring as well. Again, please keep them separate. They are separate skills, separate activities. You should be able to do a different assessment of your skills on both. My advice would be in the skills is to lay out communication skills and people development skills separately in your answer and make an assessment across each of those two areas because that's what's asked for in the question. So it's not just a jumble of general skills. We need specific communication skills and specific people development skills that then support coaching and mentoring. Is that okay? So for example, with mentoring, people development might look like actually your ability to teach or story tell, which is separate and different from coaching skills in people development. Okay. So again, try and tease out the differences, look at how they might be the same, but particularly contrast and be different too in your answers in 5.1 and 5.2. 5.3, we're going to identify development opportunities to meet personal skills, needs, and develop our own practice. This is a bit of an awkward one. It's a bit of a bridge that might not be necessary in my view. So the idea here is that you've done the assessment of stuff, and 5.3 is looking at the gap. Where might the gaps be between your own skills and practice and where your development opportunities might be? So I think here there's an element of you trying to think around, okay, well, to form a gap, what would look like? So you might look at frameworks and gold standard and good practice around these different skills and areas potentially. Or yeah, it could just be that you've got a vision for how you like to practice as a coach and or a mentor, and it looks like this, and you're currently practicing at this level instead. So that gives you an identification of some opportunities to develop yourself. It's always good to frame, obviously, where you're at now with what desired future state would be to give you the development opportunities. But then in 5.4 and 5.5, we're asked to evaluate skills and practices to produce a PDP. And again, that's coaching and mentoring. Please keep them separate. But this is where your actual sharp end of the stick comes in. Now, the evaluation of skills and practice is almost done in the previous three ACs. It's just a little bit crossed over, but um, here's your ultimate judgment on where you think your skills and practice could be and should be improved to be better as a coach and better as a mentor. Um, a good thing to kind of bring into play with this planning as well is reviews. So how would you embed an ongoing approach to personal development, personal reflection, the information you would need to improve your practice on an ongoing basis? So it's not just trying to get to a point in 6 months where you think you're good enough. It's trying to instill practices which keep you always improving. Because as a coach and a mentor, that's what we're in the business of, and it's important to role model that, I think. Bearing in mind the kind of support you would need, don't forget the concept of being coached or being mentored to help you to coach and mentor better and share best practice and experience it on the other side of the fence. Often people get into these positions of being a coach or mentor, and that's it. You're on that side of the desk now. Well, actually, experiencing it can help you to empathize better and keep connected with the person that's subject to your coaching and mentoring, and maybe help build rapport better and understand some of the areas of practice that you need to focus on to make those bridges and connections even stronger. So yeah, that's pretty much an whole assignment for you in a shorter time as about 16 minutes there. Charlotte, is there anything else that I need to talk about or?
Do you have any golden rules for assignment writing?
Yeah, for golden rules, yeah. So we talked about this we talked about this in our tutorials, but typically, and I've covered it a couple of times in that brief overview, please define anything in the question that need to be defined because it's potentially subjective or arguable or just needs clarification. So definitions is a good thing. Make sure everything in your assignment that's not absolutely clear is defined by you in your own terms. The second thing is to mind the command verb. And again, I've tried to point that out throughout this short presentation today. The most common reason why people get referred is people have failed to meet the command verb. So always know what the command verb is and make sure you deliver on what it's asking you to do. Evaluate is different from assess, is different from discuss. We just need to, respond in the appropriate ways. And the final thing is less is more. And that's particularly appropriate where a question might be asking you for a plural of something. There's examples on this particular assignment, but yeah, resource implications, that isn't a list of how many implications you can possibly think of. It would be a selection of key ones. For example, one of the greatest example, but there are sometimes questions where maybe the benefits of coaching and mentoring, again, you could write a list as long as you like, but my advice would be to select maybe 2 to 4, maybe 5 benefits, and then come up with a good evaluation of what you think they are. That's better practice. It keeps your work tighter, keeps under the word count a bit better, and delivers what the question needs without going down rabbit holes too much. So, yeah, definitions, command verb, less is more are our tips.
Great, thank you very much, James. We hope that you found the video helpful. If you have any questions at all, you can contact us on cmi@impd.co.uk and we'd be happy to help with your assignment. And we look forward to receiving your assignment soon. Thanks a lot.